They asked me once, years later, what the worst part of it was. I told them it was not the corridors, or the screaming, or the smell that crawled into your sinuses and stayed there for a month. It was the moment I understood that the men who handed me my life back had only done it because they needed me to take other lives for them. Everything that came after that moment was just paperwork written in blood. My name is Maxim. I was 23 years old when the war on the frontier reached the inner habitats, and 24 when I killed for the first time without a screen between me and the body. I am older now. I do not sleep well. I write this down because the men who lived through it are dying out, and because the boys who run the simulators today need to understand what they are practicing for. Before any of it, before the discs and the council and the long red corridors of Kizir's processing plant, we were just kids in a tournament hall. The hall was a converted cargo bay on orbital habitat 7, a tin can hanging above what was left of the lower colonies. 7 was the last clean habitat in the system, and the Frontier League ran its championship there every cycle because the dust storms below could not reach the gantries. We were called the Grandmasters. Vampire ran point. Doc was our tactical eyes. Calmer, the little one, had hands like a wired spider. Tall stood half ahead over the rest of us and never said 3 words when one would do. Yan was the kid, the one we kept alive. I was not on the squad in those days. I was a fighter, single combat, a different bracket entirely, and the rules of the league said a single combat man could not also run with a fire team. So I sat in the stands and watched Vampire's crew break the Centauri champions in 12 minutes flat. And after, I went down to the floor and held my own match and broke a man's jaw in front of 3,000 people. And we drank that night until the gravity stopped behaving. Rita was there. Rita was Vampire's, which I respected. She had taken second in the speed bracket, the racing circuits that ran through the gutted shipyards on the dark side of the habitat. She drove like she was angry at physics. I remember her laughing at something Calmer said about my haircut, and I remember thinking that this was as good as a life on the frontier was ever going to get. Then a man in a charcoal coat walked into our table and put a flat steel case down in front of Vampire, and the rest of my life began. His name was Pokrovsky, Victor Pokrovsky, president of Virtus Applied Cognition. We had all heard of Virtus. They made the training simulators every soldier on the line trained on. They made the biofeedback rigs the racing teams used. They made the recreational decks that kept the colonies sane during the long siege. Pokrovsky was a small man with a smile that did not warm anything. He congratulated us. He said the company had something new, something it wanted to test with the best young minds in the system, and the best young minds in the system were sitting at our table. He opened the case. Inside were 6 matte discs in foam, and the discs were marked only with a single etched character that I did not recognize at the time, but which I would come to dream about for years afterward. He told us they were neural training packages, next generation. He said they would only run on a calibrated rig and that calibrated rigs were rare, but as it happened, every one of us already owned one because the prize for winning our brackets was a private VR cradle from a Virtus subsidiary. He smiled again. We were too drunk to ask the right questions. We took the discs. I loaded mine the next morning in my bunk with a headache like a piling driver and the lights too bright. I expected another sim. Another wave of paper enemies and time trials. What I got was something else. The cradle lit up, the disc booted, and then the room stopped being a room. It dissolved at the edges. I felt my body relocate to a place that was not a place, a corridor of green light and white pulses, and a voice that was not a voice but a pressure inside my skull walked me through every joint, every tendon, every reflex arc I had. It rewrote me. It is the only word for what it did. It did not teach me. Teaching is slow. This was an overwrite, fast, surgical, and when it ended I was sitting up in the cradle drenched in sweat and my mouth tasted of copper, and I knew, the way you know your own name, that I could now do things with my hands that I had not been able to do 30 minutes earlier. I broke a steel rack in the gym that afternoon. I did it accidentally. I had reached out to steady myself, and the bar bent under my fingers like wet bread. I stood there for a long time looking at it. The others had the same morning. Vampire and his squad had loaded their discs and come out of the cradles able to handle small arms like men who had done it for 20 years. Rita had loaded hers and gone down to the speed strip and put down a lap time that would have been illegal in 3 jurisdictions. Yan, the kid, had gone the deepest. He had not just learned. He had become something. We all had, but Yan looked at the world afterwards like a man who could see the lines of force underneath it. I should have been afraid. I was 23 and I was not. I went to the strip that night with Lena, who was a friend in the way young men and young women are friends when they have not yet decided to ruin it, and we drank coffee in a galley off the main concourse, and 3 of Vajja's men came in. You did not know about Vajja unless you lived on 7. Vajja was the younger brother of Kizir, and Kizir was the man who ran the lower decks. Kizir was a council enforcer, which sounds like a title but was really a description of what he did with his hours. He held a license from the Habitat Authority to keep order on the production levels, and what he did with that license was operate the unofficial economy of the orbital. Vajja was the loud one, the one who got into trouble that Kizir had to clean up. That night, Vajja had decided that Lena was attractive enough to be his problem, and his men were the kind of men who escalated quickly when their boss made a decision. I do not remember the fight clearly. I remember the moment one of them put his hand on Lena's shoulder, and I remember the look on his face when my hand went around his wrist and I felt the bones move. The disc was singing inside me. I did not have to think. I broke him at the joint. I broke the second one against a counter. I put the third one on the floor with a strike to the throat that I had never been taught and that I should not have known. And then I stood there in a galley full of upended chairs and stared at my own hands and felt, for the first time, that something had been done to me that I had not consented to. Lena was crying. The cooks were against the back wall. Vajja was on the floor making a noise that humans should not make. I went home. I scrubbed my hands until they bled. I did not sleep. They came for me 3 days later. Kizir does not forgive what is done to his blood. They took me off the concourse at midday, 2 men with stunners, and the cameras on that section of the habitat had, somehow, gone offline for the relevant 6 minutes. I woke up in the back of a transport headed for the processing plant on level -4. The plant was Kizir's territory. It ran around the clock, refining the ore that came up from the lower colonies, and it was loud enough inside that nobody on the upper levels could hear what was done in its sub-bays. They put me in a holding cell. Kizir came to see me. He told me quietly what was going to happen to me over the next several hours. He told me he was going to be patient with it. He told me Vajja had asked specifically to be in the room. I want to tell you that I was brave. I was not brave. I was 23 and I was waiting to die in a refrigerator, and I was praying to nothing in particular for someone to come and get me. And the thing about that prayer, the thing that I have thought about every day since, is that someone did come. They came because of what Pokrovsky had done to us. They came because the disc was singing in them too, and they had loaded the manifest and seen where I had been taken, and they had decided, all 5 of them, that they were going to walk into a council enforcer's processing plant and take their friend out. Vampire, Doc, Kammer, Tall, and Yan, the Grandmasters, they came in through the loading dock with stolen pistols and the calm of men who had never been in a real fight but had been told by their bones that they could not lose. The footage exists. I have seen it. I do not enjoy watching it. They moved through that plant like they were on rails. Kizir's men were not soldiers. They were enforcers, comfortable with terrified clerks and broken kneecaps. And what came at them that afternoon was not what they were trained for. Doc went first, calling targets. Kammer's hands were faster than the men he was killing could blink. Tall held the doors. Yan, the kid, walked through the smoke like he was bored, and he never missed, not once. And at the end of it, Kizir was on his knees in his own office with a small dark hole in the meat of his shoulder, and Vampire was holding a pistol 6 inches from his face and asking him politely where I was being kept. They got me out. I walked out of that plant on my own feet, on legs that were shaking, and Vampire put a coat around my shoulders and said nothing, and I have loved him like a brother ever since. It should have ended there. We should have gone back to our cradles and our tournaments and our too loud nights, and we should have thrown the discs into the recycler and never spoken of them again. Instead, 2 days later, a man in a charcoal coat met us in a private dining room on the upper concourse and told us that our employer was prepared to formalize our arrangement. Pokrovsky was not alone. With him was a thin officer in a Habitat Authority uniform, a man named Sokolsky who turned out to run a department that did not officially exist. Sokolsky was polite. He talked about the war. He talked about how the long siege on the frontier was bleeding the inner habitats white, about how every conventional unit they sent out was being broken on the Kazir lines, about how the only thing that had ever slowed the enemy down was the fact that we were stubborn, and they were patient, and patience eventually loses to stubbornness. Then he talked about us. He said the DISC protocol had been developed under the umbrella of an emergency program. He said it had been tested before, on volunteers, with mixed results. He said the 6 of us were the cleanest activations they had ever recorded. He said we had a debt to pay. The debt was framed as a job. He named figures, civilian contractor figures, the kind of money a frontier kid sees and forgets how to think. He named names too. He told us about a cell of saboteurs on level -6, a separatist faction that was supposedly running material to the Kazir in exchange for being left alone when the line fell. He told us that the Habitat Authority needed those saboteurs dealt with quietly, by operators who did not officially exist, and that we, the cleanest activations they had ever recorded, were the obvious instrument. We were boys. We said yes. I have spent my life trying to explain to younger men why we said yes, and the honest answer is that we said yes because saying no was harder. Because we had been given a gift, and a gift demands a use. Because Pokrovsky and Sokolsky had been very clear, in the way men with files in front of them are clear, that what had been done to us could also be undone, and that the undoing would be ugly. Because Kizir was still breathing, and we were not stupid, and we knew that the protection of the authority was the only umbrella we had left. They sent us out that week. The first job was clean. I will not pretend it was not. The target was a freight bay on -6, and we went in at shift change, and the men we killed did not see us coming. Vampire ran point and called it like a tournament. Doc cleared rooms 2 at a time. Commer's pistol work was something out of a training video. Yan, the kid, sat on a catwalk and shot down at angles I would not have believed possible if I had not been the one tagging the marks for him. Tall covered the exit. I went hand to hand with the security detail, 3 men, and I broke them all without breaking my own rhythm. And afterwards I stood in the middle of a freight bay and looked at 6 bodies on the deck plating and felt, for the first time, the disc inside me purr. It is the only word for it. The disc purred when I worked. The thing that Pokrovsky had put inside my skull was happy when I was killing. I want you to understand that. The gift came with a passenger, and the passenger had appetites. I tried after that first bay to talk to the others about it. We were sitting in a back room in a freight quarter that Sokolsky had set aside for us, all 6 of us, eating authority rations out of foil, and I tried to put words around what I had felt. I said the disc was awake inside me. I said it had liked the work. Vampire looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Mine too." Doc nodded once. Calmer would not meet my eyes. Tall was already cleaning his weapon and would not stop cleaning his weapon. Yan, the kid, said quietly that his disc did not purr. His disc, he said, hummed. A different note. A lower one. He did not elaborate. None of us asked him to. We did 3 more jobs in the first month. Each one was cleaner than the last. Sokolsky paid us in scrip and praise. Pokrovsky watched the feeds from a clean office somewhere up Habitat and sent us recorded congratulations, the smile never warming anything. The second job was a chop shop on -5, a place the authority said was processing stolen ordnance, and we put down 9 men in 14 minutes. The third was a private residence on the upper concourse, a deputy controller of the authority's resource board, accused of skimming biomass quotas. We did not go in the front. Yan went in through a service shaft above the bedroom and put a single round through the back of the man's head while he slept, and the man's wife did not wake up, and we left her sleeping. I do not know what she thought when she woke up next to her husband's body. I have wondered. The fourth job, before the schoolhouse, was a courier in a transit lock, and Comer took that one alone, and Comer did not speak for 2 days afterwards. Rita was kept out of the wet work. They used her for extraction runs, getaway driving through the gantry tunnels, and she was good at it, but she was not in the rooms with us, and I think now that this was deliberate on their part. Rita was the one of us who still had unmediated reflexes. Rita was the one who had not been fully overwritten. The discs had given her speed, but they had not eaten her judgment. The rest of us, the shooters, the fighter, were rebuilt deeper. Rita saw it before we did. She would come back to the safe quarters after an extraction run and look at us the way you look at people who have stopped being people. She did not say it out loud. She did not need to. There was a night, maybe 3 weeks in, when she came in late from a run and sat across from Vampire at the long table and stared at him until he looked up. Then she said one sentence. She said, "You are not the man I went to that tournament with." Vampire put his fork down. He looked at her for a long time. He said, "I know." And she got up and walked out and did not speak to him for 2 days. That was the first crack in us. There were others. The fourth job was where it began to come apart. The target package described a separatist meeting in a storage bay on -8. 12 men, material handlers, suspected of running components to the Cosier through a black corridor. We went in at dusk cycle. We went in the way we always went in, hard and fast, Vampire calling angles, Comer on the lock. The door blew. The first room was empty. The second room was empty. The third room had children in it. Not children of soldiers, not minors who could plausibly have been couriers, actual children. A schoolhouse, the kind the Habitat Authority ran for the lower deck families, with a tired woman at the front of it and 20 small bodies in rows. The teacher saw us and put her hands up. The children started screaming. Vampire stopped in the doorway. Doc stopped behind him. I came around the corner with my hands ready to break someone and saw the room and felt the disc inside me purr. Anyway, indifferent to the difference. We did not kill them. I want that on the record. We did not kill any of them. We backed out of the room. We backed out of the building. We went home. And on the way home, Vampire said one sentence, and the sentence was, "They sent us to the wrong building on purpose." He was right. We pulled the original target package apart that night, all 5 of us in a back room with a clean terminal that Doc had stolen from the tournament hall. The package had been altered. The address had been changed by 12 characters, 8 hours before the operation. The original address had been a council records office, Kizier's records office. The men who had been running material to the Cosier had not been separatists. They had been authority contractors. We had been pointed at the schoolhouse because someone, somewhere, wanted the operation to fail messily, and 20 dead children in a separatist sweep would have been the kind of failure that buried us forever. Doc worked the terminal for 3 hours. Doc was the patient one of us. The one who had been an engineering student before the tournament hall ate his life, and he peeled the manifest apart in layers until he had found the alteration timestamp and the user account that had made it. The account was a ghost, a pass-through. It had been spun up 6 hours before the operation and shut down 6 hours after. But Doc, being Doc, had also pulled the routing tables for the upper concourse authority offices, and he had cross-referenced the ghost account against the terminals that had touched it, and one of those terminals was a backup workstation in Sokolsky's department. We sat with that for a while. Comer wanted to go to Sokolsky's office that night. Tall did not say anything, but the way he was holding his rifle said he was with Comer. Vampire, who was always the calm one, put both his hands flat on the table and said no. He said, if Sokolsky was alone in this, we would already be dead. He said, Sokolsky takes orders from a name we have not been told yet, and that name is the one we need. It was Sokolsky, or it was someone above Sokolsky who had used him. We did not know yet. What we did know was that the men who had handed us our lives back had also been prepared, without warning us, to spend us in a single afternoon. We sat in that back room for a long time. Yan, the kid, finally spoke. Yan said, "They are going to keep doing this until we are gone." And then he said the thing none of us had said yet, the thing the disc had been whispering to him in his sleep, which was that the discs were not the only ones. Pokrovsky had not given us prototypes. Pokrovsky had given us beta units. There were more discs in a vault somewhere, finished, ready, and what Pokrovsky was building was not a special operations cell. What Pokrovsky was building was a stockpile. I have thought about that conversation every day for the last 20 years. It is the conversation in which we became something other than what they had made us into. The disc had given us hands. The conversation gave us a mind. We split by mutual agreement into two halves. Vampire Kammer and Yan would chase the vault. Doc, Tall, Rita, and I would chase Pokrovsky's chain of command, the men above Sokolsky, the source of the rot. Lena, who I had not seen in 3 months and who had been told by the authority that I had taken a contractor posting on the frontier, was to be moved off-world quietly. I sent her a single message through a courier line. I said only, "Do not look for me." I have not seen her since. The hunt took 6 weeks. 6 weeks during which we lived in maintenance ducts, in abandoned cradle parlors, in the back rooms of speed shops Rita knew from her tournament days. 6 weeks during which Sokolsky's people figured out what we were doing and started sending teams after us. The first team came at us in a transit lock on level -3. 4 men, professionals, the kind the authority does not list on payrolls. They expected to surprise us. The disc in me was singing before they came through the door. I killed the first one with a piece of rebar. Tall killed the second one. Doc and Rita took the other 2. We left them in the lock and rerouted the cycle so the bodies would not be found until shift change, and we did not speak for an hour afterwards. We slept in shifts. We ate cold. We washed in maintenance basins when we could and did not wash when we could not. Yan's hair grew out and Kammer lost weight he did not have to lose, and Tall, who had always been quiet, stopped speaking entirely except over the team channel during operations. We were not men in those weeks. We were a working organism, 6 of us, moving through the bones of the habitat while the habitat tried to crush us. The only thing that kept us human was the small rituals we kept, the way Doc made tea every morning over a heating coil even when we had nothing to put in it, the way Rita cleaned her boots before she slept, the way Vampire, every night, took a small steel band off his wrist and turned it in his fingers for a minute before putting it back on. The band had been his mother's. He had not told any of us that until the 3rd week. He told me one night when we were the only 2 awake, sitting in a maintenance shaft above the recycler, with the heat of the recycler coming up through the grating. The second team was bigger, 8 men with the right weapons, and they cornered us in a maintenance gantry above the recycler. We lost Doc that night. Doc went down covering Rita's exit, and he went down well, the way Doc would have wanted, calling angles to the end. The last thing Doc said over the team channel was Kammer's name. They had been close, those 2. Kammer did not take it well when we relayed it later. We could not recover the body. The recycler took it. That is a thing about losing people on a habitat that nobody tells you about until it has happened to you. There is no ground to put them in. There are no rocks to mark. There are processing systems, and the processing systems are very efficient, and what they do with a body is not what a body's friends want done. We held a service for Doc the next night in the maintenance shaft, the 5 of us, with a candle Kammer had stolen from somewhere, and a thermos of bad coffee passed around the circle. Nobody spoke. We did not need to. Doc had been our eyes. Doc had been the one who saw the routes and the angles and the rotations and the timing. And without Doc we were going to have to learn to see for ourselves, and we knew we were going to do it badly. Vampire's half of the team was having their own bad month. They had traced the vault to a Virtus facility on the dark side of the habitat, but the facility was hard, and the security around it was not the kind that broke easily under disc-trained hands. Yan had gotten close. Yan had gotten inside the outer ring. And Yan had come back with the news that the vault was real, and it held 240 units, all finished, all ready for activation, and Pokrovsky's company was 3 weeks out from a contract that would distribute them to a black-budget unit being assembled by the Authority for Frontier Deployment. 240 men like us. A battalion of overwrites. We met, all of us, in a derelict cradle parlor on -2. We had not been in the same room in 7 weeks. Kammer looked thin. Yan looked old, which is something I had not thought possible in a man not yet 21. Vampire put his hand on my shoulder and held it there for a long time. We talked through the night. There was no way to stop the contract from above. The men above Sokolsky were untouchable. The Authority would protect them because the Authority needed what Pokrovsky was selling, because the long siege was going badly, and a battalion of overwrites was the kind of asset that won careers. The only way to stop it was to stop the discs themselves. Burn the vault. Destroy the masters. Make it so that what Pokrovsky was selling could not be reproduced. Kammer said it first. Kammer said, and us. He said if we burn the vault, we burn ourselves too, because the discs in us were not finished work. They were beta units. The masters in the vault were the only complete copies of the protocol. If something happened to one of us, if the disc inside us malfunctioned, the only thing that could rewrite us back to stable was the master. Burn the vault and we were on our own with a passenger in our heads that nobody else in human medicine knew how to talk to. Vampire said, then we are on our own. That was the moment. That was the moment we stopped being Pokrovsky's instrument and became something he had not designed for. He had built us to be the cleanest activations he had ever recorded. He had not built us to be willing to die alongside our own warranty. We planned it for 9 days. We pulled in every favor Rita had in the speed circuits. We pulled in every contact Doc had left behind in the tournament hall. We forged manifests. We bribed Doc workers. We even, and I am not proud of this, sent a coded message down to Kizier's surviving lieutenants, suggesting that the men who had crippled their boss were going to be at a certain place at a certain time, because we needed a distraction on the upper decks, and we knew that Kizier's people would provide one if pointed correctly. The lieutenants took the bait. The upper decks went up in a small, contained riot, and the Authority's response teams were drawn off, and we, 6 of us in a stolen freight tug, slipped along the dark side of the habitat to the Virtus facility, while the response channels were full of other emergencies. The facility was harder than Yan had described. I think Yan had been too proud to admit how close he had come to dying on his first run. The outer ring was patrolled by Virtus security, men in clean suits with serious weapons, and the inner ring was patrolled by something else. Something the Authority had assigned to Pokrovsky for the project, Kazier auxiliaries. I have not told you yet what the Kazier look like. There is a reason for that. Nobody who fights them likes to describe them. The closest I can come is this. They are taller than us by a head and a half. Their bodies are sheathed in plates of something that is not bone and not shell but partakes of both, segmented at the joints, dull green in indirect light, almost black under flare. They have 4 limbs that function as arms and 2 that function as legs, and the arms end in articulated claws that can hold a rifle or open a chest cavity with equal precision. They do not have faces, exactly. They have a cluster of sensory pits where a face would be, and a vertical slit that opens when they speak. And they do speak, in a clattering language that the Authority translators rendered as approximations because the actual phonemes are not in any human mouth's range. They smell. That is another thing nobody tells you. The Kazier give off a chemical signature, a sour, mineral, almost electrical smell that hangs in any room they have been in for more than a few minutes. It does not wash out of fabric. Men who fought them on the frontier and survived would burn their uniforms after each engagement rather than try to clean them, and the burning was not for the blood. The blood you could scrub. The smell you could not. The thing about the Khazir, the thing that makes them genuinely alien and not just monsters in armor, is that they are not individuals. They are a hive, not in the insect sense, in a deeper sense. They share cognition through a low-frequency field that their plates generate, and within a battle group of 3 or more they think as one organism. They do not panic. They do not retreat unless retreat is the optimal aggregate move. They do not value any single body of theirs more than any other. And they do not eat the way we eat. They process. They take captured species of any kind and they reduce them into biomass that is fed back into the hive's growth chambers. A Khazir prisoner of war does not exist. A Khazir prisoner is a feedstock event. The frontier veterans I had spoken with, back in the tournament days, had told me about the chambers. They had told me about what had been found when the authority finally retook a station the Khazir had held for 2 months. The men who had been left behind in the initial withdrawal. What had been left of them? I will not put it on the record. I will say only that after I heard those stories I understood why the authority was willing to take Pokrovsky's deal. I understood why a battalion of overwrites looked, from the right office in the right building, like an acceptable price. I do not forgive the choice. I understand it. There were 9 of them at the Virtus facility, attached as a security detail under a treaty arrangement the authority had not publicized. Pokrovsky had been making deals on the side. He had been selling early access to his protocol in exchange for Hive auxiliaries on his soil, which is the kind of deal that gets a man hanged on any reasonable habitat. But Pokrovsky was not on a reasonable habitat. He was on 7, in a Virtus facility, and the rules he answered to were rules he had written. We hit the outer ring at the start of 3rd shift. Vampire took point. Yan went up high. Kammer took the locks. Tall held the perimeter. Rita kept the tug warm at the loading dock with the engines on idle. I went in with Vampire. The fighter went where the hands were needed. The outer ring fell faster than I want to admit. Virtus security was not ready for us. We moved through them the way we had moved through Kizir's plan on the day they had come to get me, except that we had 6 weeks of operational experience now, and we did not stop to check that the corridors were clear. Vampire shot a man in the throat at full sprint and reloaded without breaking stride. Yan was somewhere above us in the gantries, calling targets we could not see, and the targets were falling before we reached the doors they had been guarding. Kammer opened the inner ring. We were inside. The Khazir were waiting. You do not understand, until you have been in a room with them, how wrong they are to look at. The hive field is not just a tactical advantage. It is a presence. When 3 of them are in a room together, you can feel the field on your skin, a low pressure behind the eyes, a sense that the air itself has been organized by something that is not on your side. The disk inside me, which had purred so happily through every human firefight, went silent. The passenger had no opinion about the Khazir. The passenger had been trained on human reflexes. The passenger did not know what to do with something that did not have human reflexes to mirror. We took 2 of them in the first volley. Vampire shot 1 in the sensory cluster and Tall, coming in from the side corridor, opened up on the second with a Virtus security rifle and put enough rounds into its joint plating to bring it down. The other 7 adjusted instantly. The field shifted. They moved as one unit. They did not communicate. They did not need to. They flowed through the entry hall in a formation that human soldiers spend years trying to learn. And we, with our overwrites and our purring discs and our 6 weeks of practice, were not fast enough. I want you to understand what it is like to fight something that does not have to think. I have fought men who were faster than me. I have fought men who were stronger. Every fight against a human, you can read his eyes, you can read his weight, you can feel the moment he decides what he is going to do, and you can be a quarter-second ahead of him. The Khazir did not have eyes I could read. The Khazir did not decide. The hive decided, and the hive's decisions were already made before the bodies started moving, and the bodies were just the hive expressing itself in a corridor with claws. Tall went down first. A Khazir auxiliary opened him from collarbone to hip with a single claw stroke. Tall did not make a sound. He folded onto the deck plating and his eyes were already empty. I have thought since that Tall was the lucky one of us in that corridor. Tall did not have time to be afraid. The stroke went through his nervous system before his nervous system could send a signal back, and what hit the deck plating was already a body and not a man. The rest of us had longer. Calmer screamed his name and lost his discipline for 2 seconds, and 2 seconds is forever in a fight with a hive, and the Khazir nearest him took those 2 seconds and made them count. Calmer went down with a hole through the chest where a claw had gone in and come out the other side. He was still alive when he hit the deck. He looked at me. He tried to say something. I could not get to him. The hive was between us, and the hive was reading my approach, and the hive was already moving to intercept. Calmer's lips formed a word I could not hear over the gunfire, and then his eyes went out, and I have spent 20 years wondering what the word was. I will not get to know. I have made peace with that. Mostly. Yan and the gantries started picking them off, but he was running out of ammunition and the field was already adjusting to his angle. I could hear him reloading. I could hear him cursing in a quiet, steady voice, the kind of curse a man uses when cursing is just breathing and not anger. Yan put down 2 more rounds. 1 hit. 1 did not. The Khazir he had hit went down on 1 knee and then came back up, and Yan said 1 word clearly over the team channel, and the word was no. We were going to die in that entry hall. All of us. The math was clean. The hive field had us measured, and the discs in us had no answer for what the hive was, and the time to a complete kill was, by my estimate, about 90 seconds. This is where the turn was. This is where the gift Pokrovsky had given us turned out to be the wrong gift for the room. It is also where, in the absence of any other option, we did what humans have always done when the gift is the wrong gift, which is that we threw the gift away. Vampire saw it first. I love him for this. Vampire was the smartest of us, smarter even than Doc, and Vampire saw that the disc inside him was the thing the hive could read. The hive field operated on cognition. It read patterns. It anticipated. And the disc, the overwrite, ran us on patterns. Clean patterns. The cleanest activations Pokrovsky had ever recorded. We were, to the hive, predictable, mathematical, easy. Vampire dropped his weapon. He said 1 word to me over the team channel. He said, ugly. And then he charged the nearest Khazir auxiliary with his bare hands. Ugly is what we called it back in the tournament days. Ugly was what you did when the bracket was lost and you wanted to take the other man down with you. Ugly was unstructured. Undisciplined, no flow, no rhythm, just whatever your hands could find. Ugly was the thing the disc had overwritten in us. Ugly was the human under the upgrade. Vampire went ugly. He went at the Khazir with no pattern at all, no clean angles, no trained reflexes, just 23 years of frontier orphan rage and a piece of broken railing he had picked up from the deck. The hive field flickered. I felt it flicker. The Khazir hesitated for 1 fraction of a second, because what was coming at it did not match its model of human combat, and Vampire used that fraction of a second to drive the railing up under the sensory cluster, and into whatever it was that the Khazir used to think. The auxiliary went down, the field stuttered, and in the stutter I understood. I dropped my rifle. I went ugly too. Doc was already dead, and Tall was already dead, and Calmer was already dead, and Yan was up in the gantries running out of bullets, and Vampire was bleeding from a wound I had not seen him take, and I went at the second Khazir with nothing in my hands and everything wrong about my body, and I killed it. I do not know how. The disc inside me had gone silent again, and what was driving me was something the disc had never touched, something older and meaner and entirely my own. I broke the Khazir's joint plating with my elbow, and I put my thumb into the slit where it spoke, and I felt the resistance give, and I did not stop. The plate of its forearm came down across my back, and I felt a rib go, and I kept working. The smell of it was in my mouth. Mineral. Electrical. Sour. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I was going to die in this corridor, and that the thing I was killing was going to die first, and the order mattered more to me than the dying did. Yan understood from above. Yan, the kid, the deepest of us, threw away his rifle and dropped from the gantry into the entry hall with a length of broken cable in his hand. He landed badly. He landed alive. He went into the formation with the cable and he went ugly and the field broke completely. 3 of them left. 3 Khazir in a corridor with a field that no longer matched what was coming at them. They did not retreat. They could not. The Hive does not retreat unless retreat is the optimal aggregate move, and in their model, retreat was not optimal because in their model we were already dead. They came at us. We were ugly back. Vampire took one down with his hands. I took one down with a piece of Tall's rifle and a great deal of screaming. Yan took the last one down by going through it. Literally. His cable wrapped around its throat plating, and his own body weight pulling them both into a wall hard enough that something in the Khazir's segmented anatomy gave way. The corridor was quiet. The Hive field was gone. We were 3. Vampire was bleeding badly. I was not in much better shape. Yan, somehow, was the most intact of us, and Yan was the one who carried Vampire the rest of the way to the vault. Kamer had been the lock man, but Kamer was on the entry hall floor with his eyes open, and Kamer's hands were the ones that would have opened the vault doors, and we did not have his hands anymore. We had to do it the ugly way. We did it the ugly way. Yan put a Virtus charge against the vault door, and we stood around the corner and we blew it. Inside the vault were the masters, 240 discs in foam, in cases, in clean rows under sterile light, with Pokrovsky's etched character on every one of them. 240 overwrites waiting to be sold to the authority. The future battalion. The end of human warfare as a thing humans did with their own minds. Vampire was leaning against the wall. He could not stand on his own. He said, "Do it." Yan and I did it. We carried the cases to the center of the vault and we stacked them, and we set Vampire's last charge on the stack, and we walked out of that vault with Yan carrying Vampire between us and the timer ticking down. The vault went up behind us. The masters went with it. The protocol, the overwrites, the leash that Pokrovsky had been planning to put on a generation of human soldiers, all of it went up in a flash of clean blue light, and a roar that I felt in my teeth. We did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. We did not high-five each other. We did not whoop. We carried Vampire down the corridor to the loading dock, and Rita was waiting with the tug, and Rita saw Vampire's face and started crying without making a sound, and we lifted him into the tug and Yan, and I climbed in after him, and Rita put us into the dust and burned for the dark side of the habitat at a velocity that I am sure violated several authority statutes. Vampire did not make it. He died on the deck of the tug with his head in Rita's lap 2 hours out from the facility. He was awake at the end. He looked at me. He said, "Did we burn it?" I said, "We burned it." He said, "Good." And then he closed his eyes and his hand went loose in mine, and Rita drove the tug into the dust and screamed in a way I had never heard a person scream. And Yan and I sat there in the cargo bay with our brother's body between us, and we did not speak for a very long time. We buried him on a rock that does not have a name on any official chart. Rita knows where it is. Yan knows where it is. I know where it is. Nobody else. The aftermath took 2 years. The authority was furious about the vault. The authority sent men after us. We killed some of them. We avoided others. Sokolsky was dealt with in a back room on -5 by Kamer's surviving cousin, who came up from the lower colonies for that specific purpose, and to whom we gave the address. Pokrovsky tried to rebuild the protocol from research notes, but the research notes were incomplete without the masters, and Pokrovsky's primary engineers had also, somehow, mostly died in unrelated accidents within 6 months of the vault going up. I do not know who arranged the accidents. I have my suspicions. Yan does not talk about that period. The disc in me did not malfunction. None of ours did. We had been afraid that without the masters we would degrade, that the overwrite would corrupt, that we would lose hands or minds or both. It did not happen. Whether Pokrovsky had lied to us about the masters being necessary, or whether something in the act of going ugly in that corridor had stabilized the disks in a way the engineers had not anticipated. I do not know. The authorities' medical people, when they finally got to study us under amnesty 2 decades later, had theories. None of the theories agreed with each other. The long siege on the frontier ended differently than the authority had planned. The battalion of overwrites was never assembled. The Hive auxiliaries on 7 were rolled up within a year by a Habitat Authority strike team that had finally been told what Pokrovsky was actually doing. The treaty arrangement was exposed. The men above Sokolsky were not hanged, because men above Sokolsky never are, but they were retired quietly, and their families were moved to the inner habitats. And within a decade, the war on the frontier had ground its way to a negotiated stop that the authority called a victory, and that the men who fought it called something else. Jan went into research. He works on something that he will not describe to me. I trust him. Jan is the deepest of us. Whatever he is building, it is being built for the right reasons. Rita drives. She still drives. She runs a small freight line out of one of the inner habitats. She does not race anymore. She did not marry. Neither did I. I went home to the lower colonies. I work in a salvage yard. I pull apart the wrecks of ships that the long siege left scattered across the system, and I sell the parts to people who need parts, and in the evenings I sit on the porch of my prefab and I watch the dust come down across the rocks. The disk is still inside me. I can feel it on bad nights when I am tired, when something startles me. The passenger is still there. The passenger has not made a sound in a long time. I do not know what would wake it up. I do not want to find out. There is a boy in the salvage yard. He is 16. He works for me. He asked me last month about the war because they teach a version of it in the lower colony schools now, and he had questions about whether the version was true. I told him most of it was not. I told him the real story was longer and dirtier, and that it ended with 5 young men who had been given a gift and who had decided in a corridor on the dark side of an orbital habitat that the gift was not worth what it was going to cost the next generation of boys like him. I told him their names. Vampire, Doc, Calmer, Tall, Jan. I told him Rita's name. I did not tell him mine. He did not ask. He listened. He thought about it. He said, did the aliens really fight like that? Did the field really work like that? I told him yes. I told him the Hive field was real, and that it had read us like a book on the day we walked into that facility, and that the only reason any of us walked out was that humans had a thing that the Hive could not read, and that the thing was not the disk and not the overwrite and not the training and not the math. The thing was that we could decide, in a corridor, with our brothers dying around us, to throw away the very gift that had brought us there and to fight ugly instead. To fight without pattern. To fight without rhythm. To fight the way humans have always fought when the bracket is lost and the math is against them, which is with whatever they can find in their hands and whatever they can find in their chests, and the absolute conviction that if they are going to die in this corridor, then the thing across from them is going to die in this corridor too. The boy thought about that for a while. Then he said, I think I would have run. I told him that was the right answer. I told him that if he ever found himself in that corridor he should run, and that he should not feel bad about running, because the corridor was not a place you wanted to be, and that the men who had stayed in the corridor had not stayed because they were brave. They had stayed because they did not have anywhere else to go. The boy went back to work. I sat on the porch a while longer. The dust came down across the rocks in long, slow sheets, the way it does on the lower colonies, and the sun went red at the edge of the horizon, and somewhere far above me, in an orbit I cannot see from the surface, the wreckage of a Virtus research facility is still drifting in a slow tumble that the authority has never quite gotten around to cleaning up. I think about that wreckage some nights. I think about the cases of discs in their foam, vaporized in a blue flash, and I think about Vampire's hand going loose in mine, and I think about Tall on the deck plating with his eyes already empty, and I think about Doc calling angles to the end, and I think about Calmer's face when we told him about Doc, And I think about Yan dropping from a gantry into a hive formation with a piece of broken cable in his hand and a look on his face like he had finally figured something out. We were not heroes. I want that on the record too. We were 5 boys and a girl who had been given a gift that came with a passenger, and we figured out late that the gift was a leash, and we burned the leash and the people who had been planning to use it, and the burning cost us 4 brothers and the rest of our lives. If you want to call that heroism, I cannot stop you. I would call it bookkeeping. The boy at the yard finished his shift. He waved at me from across the lot. I waved back. The disk inside me did not stir. The dust came down. The light went out of the sky in the long red way it does on the lower colonies, and I sat on my porch and I listened to the silence, and I was, for the first time in a long time, not afraid of what I might hear in it. That is what I remember. That is what I want the boys who run the simulators to understand. The gift is never free. The passenger always has appetites. And the only thing in the human catalog that no upgrade, no overwrite, no Hive field, no council enforcer, and no corporation president has ever figured out how to read is the ugly thing under the training. The thing your grandfather had. The thing the man at the next bench has. The thing that decides, when the math is against you and the bracket is lost, that you are going to stay in the corridor anyway, with whatever you can find in your hands. Keep that thing. Whatever else they teach you, whatever else they put inside your skull, keep that thing. It is the only part of you that is yours.